Welcome back, everyone, for the penultimate session of the day, where we are joined by two of the UK's most promising AI scale-ups. So please welcome Sachin Dugal, who's founder and chief wizard at Builder.ai. What does a chief wizard actually do, Sachin?
Whatever is magical in the day.
Okay, and Builder.ai, as I understand it, it makes it easy to create software, apps, and websites without needing to know anything about how to code or kind of deeper technical knowledge. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, the best way to think about us is a marriage between Lego and AI to let anyone build software applications. And our process is like ordering from Domino's Pizza. You talk to the conversation AI, you answer some questions, she tells you the features you need, and then 80 to 90% is done by machine. And then the last sort of 10 to 20%, we have experts around the world that do the last mile, which is obviously very important for enterprises because you have back-end systems that it needs to integrate with.
It's that kind of magical marriage between humans
Hence
and
Wizard.
machines. Exactly. And of course, you reached unicorn status last year.
We reached camel status last year.
Okay, and tell us about the camel analogy.
See, the thing is, I think when you hear the word unicorn, the things that immediately sound up is they must be spending a lot of money, raising a lot of money, and hiring a lot of people and firing a lot of people, all in parallel. And to me, I think we're building a generational business. We want to be around in 50 years from now, and we want to see what's the fastest way to build $1 trillion business. And we're not going to do that if we just keep raising money and spending money.
Okay, excellent. I think Silicon Valley could probably learn a lot from that. And Victor Riparbelli, so co-founder and CEO of Synthesia, but we thought it might be fun to show exactly what Synthesia does rather than just to tell you. So we have a short video.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Times Tech Summit. I'm so excited that soon you're going to meet Victor Riparbelli, the CEO and co-founder of Synthesia. But before you do, here's a quick explanation of what Synthesia does. Roll the tape.
Synthesia, the world's first AI video communications platform for business. It transforms employee training, customer enablement, marketing, sales, and everything in between into short, engaging, and fun videos.
And just in case anyone was in any doubt at all, none of those people were actually real. They were all avatars created by Synthesia, which is absolutely terrifying. And we were due to be joined also by Priya Lakhani, the fantastic CEO and founder of Century Tech, but unfortunately she's been struck down by COVID, which feels very retro in the autumn of 2024, so we send our best to Priya. So tell me, guys, you are both running really successful AI businesses in London. What's that been like on the journey so far? Sachin?
So, we started the company in late 2016, early 2017, and everyone we went to in the beginning and said, you're not going to have to write code. You're not going to have to do these things. Humans are not going to be doing this, was generally met with a lot of skepticism. I remember some of the conversations I had. I remember even with Bindi right in the beginning, who saw our journey from day zero, and she's like, just ignore all the naysayers. You'll eventually sort of break through. I say the flip side, having started the company in San Francisco and then moved it to London, at least from a team and personnel perspective, is we found that the cost, productivity, sort of general thinking, and also the fact that you were building for the world really existed in the London ecosystem. Whereas I think what we found on the West Coast at least was a lot of how do we sell within the West Coast? Then how do we sell within North America? And so internationalization was really tough. And for us, that's been really profound because when we launched in 3 countries. And we're now we service customers in almost 50 countries. And the US is our startup market, whereas everyone else the US is their main market and everywhere else is their startup market.
Okay, and what are some of the challenges? So obviously, there's lots of benefits of being based in London, and internationalization is one of those. What do you see have been some of the challenges over the years so far, particularly around things like talent, infrastructure? We've talked a lot today about computing power. We've also talked about investment, which we'll come on to in a second. Yeah. But yeah, how have you found some of those things?
Look, let me start by saying I'm very pro-UK. Sort of born and brought up in North London, went to school here. I would say a fairly sort of fair output of the UK education system. And I think that's really what sets this country apart. But when we look at our journey, which I think has covered 3 different generations of technology at this point, funding is really hard here. early stage exists, the EIS program's fabulous, you can get an A round done the minute you go past that. You know, if you are not going west or not going east, you ain't getting funded. I think the second comes down to a lot of the talent in the UK is now ending up working for US companies. So you're actually starting to see the American cousins come into London. You know, they're taking on large parts of the London ecosystem, paying wages that are obviously distorted compared to San Francisco, but distorting the marketplace that we're in, which makes it much harder to get started. And I say that the third is, you know, when I've been in the US and when we were starting, there was a lot of like America first. I don't really hear a lot of UK first. I hear a lot of UK second or third or fourth, and you know, we'll let the Americans figure it out, or we'll let the Europeans go figure it out, and we'll kind of do some bandaging in the middle to make it ours. And I think that's a shame, considering these key technologies, they were all invented here. Everything from the World Wide Web to even modern day transformer models, they've got deep originations here.
And how about you, Victor? Obviously, you could have chosen to build your company wherever you chose. You didn't choose Denmark. You didn't choose Silicon Valley. So why London? And do you stand by that decision?
I actually think my experience of building in the UK has been relatively good, especially compared to Denmark and Copenhagen, which is a terrible place to build a business. I actually did try and get to the US. I couldn't because I didn't get a visa. So I ended up here kind of a little bit by chance. But I think that looking back now, there's a lot of pros and there's definitely also some cons. So I think on the con side, it's similar story. The first round is impossible to raise in the UK, especially with a pitch like ours, which was, you know, fairly kind of out there. Like, you know, we basically went out to people and said in 2017 that we're going to build generative AI that's going to enable anyone to make video that looks like Hollywood films eventually. And that's something that they would fund on the West Coast because they love big, grand ideas, because most of the financiers there come from the tech world. In London, most people come from private equity. And so if you cannot understand a business via a private equity kind of lens, then it's very difficult to get funding. And so unfortunately, it's actually only our Series C round, which we did last summer, that came with an anchor investor in the UK, Excel. And that's been a great relationship. But in general, I think Europe as a geography is very risk averse, right? And I think that's something a lot of startups feel. On the pro side, I think on team and culture, you kind of touched a little bit upon it. I think we've talked a lot about this, but I think there's a great arbitrage in raising from US investors and US valuations and hiring your talent in Europe, right? Talent is half the price. There is, to some extent, maybe a little bit less drive and ambition. People are not as ferocious as they are in the Valley about like making money and working at the best companies. But I do think what you get in return for that is that people are much more loyal. People don't job hop every quarter if you miss a quarter, right? That happens very often in Silicon Valley. The best engineers, they're like they view their job as building their stock portfolio. And so two quarters down, you're off to the next cool, hypey thing. That doesn't really happen here. So I think I think that's like a European spirit, right? My sense is that a lot of people here want to have a job that they like. They want to get paid well for it. But it's not purely like a transactional relationship of like, how do I get as rich as possible the fastest? So I think actually the UK is a pretty good place. Where we are hitting kind of walls now is when you really get into that stage of the company where you need to hire like true executives that have seen the movie before. They've handled hundreds of millions of dollars in ARR in SaaS businesses. The pool in Europe is very, very, very small. I think one positive thing we've experienced, though, is that it actually seems a lot easier to move people from the Bay Area to London and to move people from the Bay Area to New York, because I think London and Europe has this sort of appeal to a lot of people as maybe not like as a forever thing, but as a short adventure. So that's something we've been putting a lot of work into, branding that as like, you know, join an awesome company and take your family on a European adventure.
And what about, so obviously you've both raised money from outside of the UK, and last year your $250 million round was led by the Qatari Investment Authority. I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of kind of interest in UK AI companies, and also Danny was saying earlier in US AI companies as well from the Middle East. So come on, you're amongst friends here. Tell us honestly, what's that been like?
So let me start by saying I think QI is incredible. You know, you raise capital at a certain point in time to achieve a certain objective. So our Series A was led by Lakestar. But like you said, It's not like you institutionally can find Series A investors quite easily to build groundbreaking ideas in Europe and in the UK. But we found 2 investors within the fund that one was from the US, one was at Goldman, so Manu and Steven and Klaus, and they had this projected view of the future. So you had that risk. Then we went to sort of Series A and B, and we had Jungle. What they brought to us was an operating partner that was the CEO of Flipkart. And so when you think about operating at scale, Amazon operates the biggest scale, and Flipkart was the Amazon of India. And so you suddenly had someone that you could speak to for operational pieces. When you're starting to raise your Series D, what are you really after? One is capital, but really what you're after is access. And QIA, number one, I think they're not running on this 7-year cycle. So the benefit for us is they're like, build the right generational business. Do not build because we need you to go public in 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is. I think the second is they can literally call anyone in the world. So I have sat and I've said, hey, listen, there is a very large retailer in the UK that the Qataris own in London. And I said, I need to meet the CEO. For 6 months, I was trying to get a meeting. And I spoke to QIA and I got a meeting in a week. And I've had the same thing in Singapore, I've had the same thing across Europe, I've had the same thing in the US. Wherever they have an asset, they're like, our responsibility is to connect you into that asset. So I think from that perspective, we were really blessed with them as an investor.
And that does come back to a point that was raised earlier around kind of patient capital. So have you found that, what's the relationship with your investors, Victor? And are you happy that they're in it for the long haul, or are they going to want an exit in 4 years' time?
I think I'm pretty happy. Like, we've been lucky to work with great investors and great funds who I think understand the long-term perspective of venture capital. I would definitely say that I have seen firsthand via my angel investment kind of less savvy funds in the UK and Europe in general having very odd terms and not being very founder friendly, needing liquidity very quickly, and those are the kind of things that are really, really unhealthy for the ecosystem. But I think there are definitely lots of great investors in Europe, right? I think ultimately what it comes down to when you get to the later runs is deep pockets and long-term vision. And I mean, I haven't had any experience myself with the Middle East, but Excel and NVIDIA, who led our latest round, has been great investors so far.
I'd like to now turn slightly to the kind of conversation around AI. And when we were chatting before today, we were talking about, you know, it can be slightly frustrating, perhaps, Sachin, that there's this constant conversation about the existential threats of AI and certainly around frontier AI. Why do you think that's the case? And do you think it's a distraction from the day job?
So I think it's a huge distraction. But before maybe answering the question, maybe the level set on where we are. I call this the AOL moment. So who remembers when AOL launched the disk? And everyone said, oh my God, the internet's here. Actually, the internet was here 40 years before. And when we think about artificial intelligence, we have to look at it as trying to assemble human thinking. We have principally three ways to think. If you could all close your eyes for a second and think of that video of you swimming as a child, that is not generated, that happened. So that's a knowledge graph. We don't have to be in generative AI for that. If I said, could you help me complete my sentence? What do you think I'm going to, and the word you're probably thinking about is say or do next. I had 100,000 words you could have chosen, but you chose those two. That's a graph neural network or sort of causal inference. And then we can say, let's make a poem about the three of us sitting and, you know, give it our LinkedIn profiles. Now we're in the world of generative. And why is this analogy important? Is because generative is not going to solve the problem. You need multidisciplinary. And so then you have to ask yourself, what really happened in November 22? What really happened in November 22 is not that we started conversational AI or transformers. They've been around for eons. It's actually, we took the most complex piece of software on the planet and we put it behind a chat screen. And I don't know about you, but it looks like WhatsApp. I speak to my mom on WhatsApp. She's pretty authentic. And you know, when she replies back, I take it as a sense of authority. And it's relatable. And now we had something that sounds like a human, sounds relatable, but is really dumb. And I think this hysteria and the existential crisis, sort of thinking around the singularity, you know, a lot of it is bred by the fact that we're using the wrong terminology. So, you know, some of my pet peeves, It doesn't think. It's a parrot. As long as it's seen something with those words in that sequence, it will get the next word right. Otherwise, it'll get it wrong. It's not hallucinating. It just statistically got the wrong word. Hallucination is a human emotion. Thinking is a human concept. It's just predicting. And the reason why, to me, this is important, I'll give you the last analogy, is if you remember Rail Player, we all said Rail Player was going to change the world. And we were now suddenly going to get video streaming in a browser. And then you hit play, and you waited 30 minutes to hear a 30-second grainy video. In the world of Netflix, where's Rail Player? And the reason I give you that analogy is, everybody said, oh, Rail Player is the thing. We need to build bigger pipes. And now we're streaming 4K and 8K video over 2 Mbps. So the bigger pipe wasn't important. And so we haven't really seen what this technology can do. We're literally just scratching the surface.
And what do you think, Victor? And how do you think the conversation has moved on from perhaps this time last year when we obviously held the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park and Elon Musk was on stage with Rishi Sunak? How can we all forget? But do you think that wasn't very helpful in terms of the dialogue? And when you talk about your business in terms of AI and what it's capable of, people start worrying about, machines stealing our jobs and killing us all.
Yeah, I mean, I think 12 months, 18 months ago, the world was like collective psychosis where all of a sudden people experienced this like amazing technology and people's minds just started going absolutely crazy, right? I think that happens not often, but it happens, that the media picks it up, everyone begins thinking about it, and no one is like really actually thinking it through. So I'm very happy that we're a bit more back to rational thinking now. I think the existential risk is a philosophical question, and that is it's definitely interesting. I think no one will doubt that. We've been making science fiction about for hundreds of years. But if we want to get practical about AI, let's spend 10% of our time on that and 90% of what are the risks, what are the harms that exist today with the current technologies, how do we make sure that we reduce those, how do we want to regulate it, like all these questions are real and present today, right? So I think that it feels like we're like more there now, which I think is great. Ultimately, AI is technology like anything else. We all love to say AI all the time, and it is a useful tool for discussing these things, but when we discuss harmful things AI can do, ultimately it's technology, right? And so there was this period, I think people are moving away from that, but like 6-12 months ago, where in the EU they wanted to regulate how big the models you can train are, how much compute you can train them on, which is obviously completely idiotic, right? Because as we just heard before, the model you could train 12 months ago with X amount of compute, you can probably train with a fourth of the compute today, and so on and so forth. We should focus on the things we don't want people to use this technology for, and we should reduce those. But look, I think hype bubbles are natural, right? They happen all the time, and we sit on stages and we talk about like how we're all going to be in AR, VR headsets 4 years ago, right? That was the big thing. How we're all going to be doing. So I think it's just the cycle of how the world works, and I think every time we go into these hype cycles, we imagine a lot of things, then we get very disappointed, and then we end up finding like the right level, but it takes time, right?
Well, and I think I want to add to that, which is, especially with what I saw at the AI Summit, and sort of this was my big disagreement with our last Prime Minister, was you're taking everyone to this shiny object, which it's going to change in itself. But let's look at a modern day issue. So we think we're a complicated species. We're actually not. We have 4 chemical reactions that govern our behavior: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Now you have a kid playing Candy Crush. And you train the kid by giving them shots of dopamine of things that happen on a screen. I'm promising you that is a lot more dangerous than the current day large language model. We're doing nothing to regulate how software is ending up in classrooms for 5-year-olds. We're doing nothing to regulate how tablets and devices are becoming the proxy human for our kids. And it's making our kids neuro-lazy. Right? They basically can't have a conversation. Because if you did not ping something or float something or show a balloon on a screen in 10 seconds, I don't know there's no balloon, right? But if I press it on a tablet, there's a balloon that comes up and it pops. So why is the kid going to be interested in talking to you? That's the real risk.
So when it comes to regulation, because obviously, again, that's a topic that's come up today, and we had 2 regulators on stage earlier. Do you think they're focusing their efforts in the wrong areas, frankly?
Quite frankly, I don't think they have a clue, if I'm brutally honest. And I don't think anyone does to a certain extent, because the wrong people are in the room. And why do I say that? This technology is changing at a rate faster than you can ever regulate it. So when you look at the markets around the world that are not trying to regulate, but they're trying to build frameworks, actually they're being a lot more successful. You're seeing this in places like Japan, you're seeing this in places like the UAE and in the GCC, you're seeing this in places like India, where they're taking a framework approach. They're bringing together people from literature, philosophy, art, the media, computer science, and the history, because everyone's really concerned that if a language model in its present day became prolific, we would make all of history homogeneous. And we know that there's no single version of the truth. But unfortunately, a language model uses volume. So whatever has more volume, it thinks is the truth. And so we don't have the right people around the room.
Victor, who should be around the table?
I mean, I agree. I think we just don't know how this is going to play out. And being overly prescriptive is, I think, rarely leads anywhere productive. And I go back to my previous point of, I think there's like AI regulation, AI regulation, AI regulation. Ultimately, a lot of the harms with AI are not new, right? Fraud with AI is still fraud. It's just using a different tool in front of it. And I think we all agree we don't want fraud in our society, right? We don't want bias in the algorithms. And that's not like an AI-specific problem. That's like an outcome we don't want. So being outcome-focused, I think, is much, much more interesting. But the issue is that that doesn't get you lots of viewers and lots of interest from the public, right? You have to go around with this like big AI sign, hey, I'm talking about AI, listen to me. But I think actually the UK, at least the last administration, took a fairly sensible approach of saying, look, we know this is a very powerful technology. We don't know exactly how it's going to transform society. We'll stay back and watch, stay close to the companies building this technology. We think the companies have a responsibility to ensure their products don't do harm, whatever that means. But we'll learn as we go, right? And I think that's the only sensible way to do it.
Well, and my only thing, and we disagreed on this one between the brief, my only disagreement with this is the only unsensible thing we did is we just assumed all of them are American. And that the only people in the room should have an American dialect. And to me, that is just preposterous. Especially when you think about regulation and you think about AI, you have to think about an iceberg, right? We know that what's below the water in an iceberg is much bigger than what's above it. And what's below the water of the AI iceberg? It's compute and infrastructure, and it's social media. And we kind of missed regulating both of those. So what are you going to do if a model starts to misbehave? We've already proven we can't get Mark Zuckerberg to come here. We've already proven we cannot subpoena or summon a CEO of an American company to come here. So what are we going to do now? Get them to do what Brazil did, which is hire a proxy so that we can then take the proxy to the commons and ask them questions. It's pointless. We have to take a British-first approach.
And so coming back to the point on the... Sorry, Victor, did you want to add something before we move
on?
No,
I just wanted to add, I think when we talk about this regulation, right, I've been quite involved in a lot of these talks as well, and it's always like so disheartening when you're in Brussels, for example, which I've been a couple of times, and sitting in a room with like 65-year-old people, no disrespect there, that have never used ChatGPT, they've never been a day on TikTok, they don't have a Facebook account, they barely use email, right? And for them, it's an intellectual exercise to understand all these technologies. And it gives me such a flashback to like social media, disinformation, misinformation, which are very real problems. But there's so many times, like talking about disinformation and misinformation with someone who's not on TikTok themselves, who does not understand what I mean. It's just like, it's just so unproductive, right? Because actually, I think in that regard, and with a lot of AI, I think the part of the population that's most at risk for falling for deepfakes is the 60-year-olds. It's not the 20-year-olds. Anyone who has kids or know young people know that they can spot that there's so much more critical towards information, right? And so I think a lot of the issues that arise with these regulatory talks, that becomes this like very theoretical exercise by people who are very, very, very far removed from using these products in their daily life, understanding the broader cultural context that content in my world gets consumed in, right?
But how do we get the right people around the table? Because clearly you guys are quite busy. So how do we, kind of incentivize people to come and get around the table that aren't there already?
Well, I think everyone's incentivized, if I'm brutally honest. I just don't think they've been invited to the party.
Exactly.
And I think, if I go back to my childhood, there's one thing that the United Nations Environment Program did, which I thought was just fascinating. They got a bunch of 11-year-olds together and talked about the future of the environment. And everyone laughed, saying, what is an 11-year-old going to talk about the future of the environment? And they got startling input from how young people thought about their future. I'd love to know how many young people were in the social media regulation conversation, were in the AI regulation, how is it going to affect schools, what's the syllabus? None. You've got people that are so distorted, so far away from reality of the world, hypothesizing about what the future is. And if I learned through meditation one thing, it's what Buddha said. He said, true wisdom doesn't exist in the intellect. It exists in experience. And they have none.
So you just swap all the 65-year-olds out for 11-year-olds. Got it. So coming back to earlier on, you hinted at the change in administration. So how are you feeling about the change in administration? Because obviously Rishi Sunak, for all his faults, was seen as a big kind of flag waver for British technology. Has anything you've heard so far, Victor, out of the new administration made you feel optimistic that they're going to support UK AI companies like yours?
I mean, I don't think we've heard that much yet. I think, and honestly, from the previous administration, right, I think we heard some things, but I think it's not very concrete and practical. So I think I'm glad to hear that they take AI seriously. They think that the UK is in a great position, which I think we genuinely are, to build a really strong ecosystem and be a global leading superpower in AI. But until we know exactly what that means, I think it's difficult, right? I have ideas of what I think they should do. I don't think they're going to do them.
Tell us, we'll pass
Well,
them
I
on.
think it's actually pretty simple. Subsidize GPUs, for example, right? Training is a huge part of cost of building an AI company. Incentivize, cloud providers to build data centers in the UK. That's jobs. That's good for the economy. Subsidize part of
Just to be clear, Victor, sorry to interrupt. You want UK companies, because I think this is an important point, to build the data centers, not US companies, right? Because this is something we talked about too.
Well, I think we might disagree on that. I definitely think UK companies.
Okay, please do disagree.
I'm open to both. I just think that, but I think that's like a real competitive advantage. Yeah. We discussed the data thing as well, which I think we disagree on, but I think one of the great things here is that there's a great public sector with lots of health data, right? And all that health data is not being utilized for anything because we're worried about privacy and so on, which is a very valid fear. But then let's anonymize the data, give it to companies that are based in the UK, let them build globally leading healthcare products. That's much more difficult to do in the US. That's a real advantage, right? And I think just those two things are very simple. They will potentially be controversial, so people will not do them. But talk and summits and all these things, ultimately, I think if you really want to build a strong ecosystem, it's about helping companies that are already successful become mega successful. And those are things that they care about.
Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think generally it feels like they're all headlines for campaigns. There is one person that I think is sort of like doing God's work for all intents and purposes, and that's Matt Clifford. And how much work he's doing in speaking to folks, really trying to understand everyone's the level playing field, really trying to digest it. And, I mean, if you had 100 Matt Cliffords running around with different backgrounds, different things, that's really the route. I think if we're going to be relevant as a government, or if the government is going to be relevant in an AI world, it has to start thinking about how it uses AI, how it becomes AI first, not just like it's a bit of software that we're going to deal with.
Well, we've heard Matt Clifford's name a few times today. If only we could use AI to clone Matt Clifford, that might be really useful. What were you going to say, Victor?
Yeah, put X amount of, even it doesn't have to be that much, $100 million, 100 million pounds in the budget for the public sector to adopt AI services from British companies. Even the things as simple as that is impactful. And I just want to second that. I think Matt Clifford is an amazing example of someone who has actual, real experience from the real world in building companies. And that's also why he's doing a really good job at it.
And he's open to the debate. Like, I've sat with him and said, I don't agree with that. And he's like, that's great, and we have a discussion. You try having that conversation with someone else. It's virtually impossible.
And so lots of people in the room who I've spoken to today and others in the kind of tech community are sort of waiting with bated breath for the budget, which obviously happens later this month. There's been, lots of talk of changes to capital gains tax, amongst other things. How much do you guys actually care about that kind of stuff? And should the administration be wary of making changes to capital gains tax? Could it damage our competitiveness if, frankly, at the end of your business, when you sell or you list, you stand to keep less of the money you make? Is it a real concern, Sachin?
So I think it's really interesting. I was speaking to someone in the House of Lords, I won't mention who, and they said that this entire study around capital gains tax was down to one economist somewhere in the middle of the UK, works at a university, preparing a paper saying many people will not leave. And I think, number one, that is the wrong approach, because you're basically timing it to the negative. I think you have to look at the fact that on average, an entrepreneur will create 1,000 jobs. What's more important to you, 1,000 jobs or trying to get your slice of cake on the entrepreneur, who, by the way, by the time the company becomes a Series E, F, goes public, they're down to like single teens. percentage. So you're taking someone that's already been hit 80% down and saying, I'm going to take another 30, 40% off you. It kind of feels like the wrong incentive structure, right? Especially on the other hand, you're saying, we want you to build here, we want you to come here, we want you to do those things. I just don't think there's alignment in that.
So it's about the optics and the message that you're
I think it's
sending
the
out?
optics. It's also, I think the whole framework is not thought out well. The thing that really, and this is the two-edged sword, is the thing I can't get my head around is this 4-day week. And is it because they want the 5th day to be run by AI, or is it they want, I don't understand, how do we service the world on a Friday if everyone's only working 4 days? And these things, it just blows my mind. Where was the conversation?
And how about you, Victor? What are you looking out for in the budget, if anything at all? I know you're always on a plane somewhere, so perhaps you won't be studying it as much as we will in the Times newsroom.
I mean, I think obviously it will have an impact, right? I think history, I think very well illustrates that these kind of things matter a lot for the ecosystem. It's not going to be overnight that everyone is going to leave the UK, right? I think there are a lot of other things that makes the UK a great ecosystem, and personally, I don't think taxes are like end be of all. I also care a lot about the environment, the culture, and all these other things that's around me. So I think that if they are going to do that, it's also really important that they invest it in things that actually make the infrastructure better, right? Probably most of us here live in a bubble in the nicer parts of London, but as someone who's not from here, it definitely feels like there's work to do in bringing up the entire economy and the entire country. And I think if they don't manage to deliver on that, if they also raise taxes, then they're in serious trouble.
Well, and you have an issue of bringing folks in. We're having serious conversations with senior folks that we wanted to bring in. I've definitely been asked this tax question. Sachin, do you know what's going to happen on X, Y, Z? And I was like, wow. I mean, we haven't even got the budget yet, and half the world seems to know that the UK, and they said, well, can I live in Milan instead? Or because Milan's got this fixed structure now. Can I do it out of the UAE? And I'm sort of scratching my head saying, no, we really need to be a British HQ'd business. We can't stop with engineering and everything else around the world. But it's a conversation that's popping up every week, every second week.
And so and this is a related point, so we ran a summer series devised by Katie and the team at the Times, which highlighted promising UK AI companies. And I was struck by one of the reader comments last night, which read, don't worry, all of the promising ones will be American-owned in no time, which was a slightly pessimistic note. But I think it makes a serious point, and we heard from Darktrace earlier today, which was recently obviously bought by a US company for $6 billion. So how do we keep you two both here and make sure that you don't bugger off to New York to list, or you're swallowed up by some US giant?
Well, I think those are three different questions, to be honest. The liquidity is what determines where you go public. There is a giant question mark on what the liquidity in the UK will look like by, I guess, I'm just guessing, by the time any of us go public. I think there's a bigger issue, which is, and we were discussing this backstage, the Brits and our government made it so easy to leave the UK. It was like 3 pieces of paper, a check in the box election, and you could be a US company, and there was no taxes charged by Uncle Sam. We've had this discussion about bringing the company back to the UK, because we're a Delaware C Corp, but really we're UK headquartered. And it's astronomically expensive. It's so expensive that it would make sense to start all over again. And so we're like, well, why do we do that deal? That kind of makes no sense to me. And then sort of my fears around on the AI piece. And I think that's a real concern.
So if you had to list tomorrow, would you do it here or in New York?
Under the Safe Harbor Act, I can't talk about listing.
Victor?
I mean, I think we're not actively thinking about that, but it's hard to find a lot of good arguments for listing here. I think if you look at the general performance and liquidity, right? I think there's tax, immigration processes, all these things, make it a really nice place to stay. And I also think that it's a bit more of a soft value maybe, but I actually think the UK has a slight branding problem in some sense. I think if we went to the US and marketed the country as being moved to London, get the European lifestyle, there's lots of great art, there's culture, it's relatively safe compared to San Francisco at least. But all those things actually are very appealing to a lot of people, right? But I don't think we're selling that very well. And as much as we're talking to a lot of hardcore business people who want to make money and are very motivated by winning and all those kind of things, there's also humans behind it. I actually think appealing more to that side of it, come for a European adventure for 3, 4, 5 years, I think that would be massively beneficial. And ultimately, I think that matters more than a percentage change in cap gains to tax.
And you know, it's also about attracting entrepreneurs. So I just give you my own example. Like, I recently moved to the UAE. Personally, the company is headquartered here. And I got a golden visa in 2 days. I got my Emirates ID in a day. I landed there, I got a bank account the next morning. I had a car loan within a week. I had a phone card within 30 minutes, a SIM card within 30 minutes. Basically, I was up and running in a week as if I'd lived there for the last 10 years. When I got married and my wife had an Indian passport and I had to get her into the UK, we had to do a book that proved we were married of every picture since we dated. Indian families don't date a lot, right? So we had to go find pictures. The second was we then had to we spent 20,000, 30,000 pounds with lawyers. It took 6 months. And I had something called a green letter, which is like, we really want you to come back, and it still took 6 months. And you just look at the difference. We're basically saying you're not welcome.
So we need to get better at talking about brand Britain, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, what a great note to end on. Thank you so much to Sachin and Victor. Plenty of food for thought there. And I think it's fair to say it's good to see lots of energy and enthusiasm about the UK as a centre of global AI excellence. So thank you both very much. Please give them a round of applause.